Hey everyone, don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you love romance stories that sweep you off your feet. Ava Carter had always been a bit clumsy, but she never expected one wrong turn to completely change her life. It had been a hectic day in the city, rushing between errands, dodging traffic, juggling her oversized tote bag and coffee cup. She was exhausted, her heels clicking on the pavement, and all she wanted was a quiet evening at home. But fate had other plans. When she saw the mansion, she thought it was the Airbnb she'd rented for a last-minute weekend getaway. The grand gates, the perfectly manicured lawns, the marble fountain in the driveway, all screamed luxury, but in her distracted state, she didn't pause to question it. She pressed the intercom button, muttering to herself about how late she was for check-in, and the gates swung open with surprising ease. Ava stepped onto the cobblestone driveway, feeling slightly guilty but telling herself it was just a harmless mistake. The mansion itself was even more breathtaking up close. White pillars, glass windows that reflected the sunset, and a door so tall it seemed to touch the sky. She pushed it open, expecting a reception desk or a host, and instead found herself in a vast, opulent hallway. Chandeliers hung from the ceiling like crystal waterfalls, and the scent of fresh flowers mixed with something more intoxicating, something expensive and masculine. She wandered cautiously, heels clicking against the marble floors, glancing at the artwork and furniture that seemed to belong in a magazine. Okay, maybe I should find someone, she whispered to herself. Before she could take another step, a deep voice broke the silence. You're late. Ava froze, her heart racing. She turned, and that's when she saw him. He was impossibly tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed custom-made for his broad shoulders. His hair was dark, slightly tousled, and his eyes, well, they were the kind of eyes that could make anyone forget their own name. For a moment, Ava forgot to breathe. She stammered. He stepped closer, his gaze intense, assessing her as if he were trying to figure out exactly who she was. I expected someone else, he said smoothly, his voice low and commanding. There was no anger in it, just curiosity. And somehow, it made her knees weak. Before Ava could respond, he moved closer, his hand brushing against hers in a gesture that felt almost intentional. The next moment, his lips were on hers, a soft, commanding kiss that made her entire body shiver. Ava pulled back slightly, eyes wide. I'm sorry, she gasped. I think you've got the wrong person. But he only smiled, a hint of amusement dancing in his eyes. I'm usually very careful about who I kiss, he said, tilting his head slightly, but you're different. Ava's mind was spinning. Different, mistaken, billionaire, kiss. She stumbled back, almost tripping over a luxurious rug, and tried to explain. I thought this was, I rented an Airbnb, I'm so sorry. He chuckled, a low, velvety sound that made her chest flutter. No need to apologize. You're here now, and I can't say I regret it. Her thoughts raced. She didn't even know his name. How could she explain this? And yet, there was something about the way he looked at her, as if he were seeing her in a way no one ever had. She felt a strange pull, a magnetic force that drew her closer despite her better judgment. I should go, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I really made a mistake. Perhaps, he replied, his tone softening, but maybe mistakes are sometimes worth exploring. Ava blinked at him, unsure if he was serious or teasing. Her mind screamed caution, but her heart whispered curiosity. She had always been practical, careful, never one for impulsive adventures. And yet here she was, standing in a billionaire's mansion after a kiss she didn't expect, feeling an unfamiliar thrill. He offered her a hand, a gentlemanly gesture that made her forget all rational thought. Hesitantly, she placed hers in his, and he led her toward a sitting room, luxurious beyond belief. The furniture was modern yet warm, the colors perfectly chosen, and the walls decorated with artwork that seemed priceless. She couldn't help but glance around, silently judging every detail while secretly marveling at the opulence. So, he said, settling into a leather armchair, since you're here, what's your story? Ava swallowed nervously. Should she tell him the truth? The full embarrassing story of how she had mistaken his mansion for an Airbnb? Or should she invent a more glamorous explanation, one that fit the world he clearly inhabited? Before she could decide, he leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on hers, as if waiting for the story to unfold. And in that moment, Ava realized something terrifying and thrilling. She had no idea who this man really was, but she knew one thing for certain: her life had just changed forever. Ava tried to steady her breathing as she sank into one of the plush chairs, feeling oddly out of place yet strangely at ease in the luxurious room. The billionaire, whose name she still didn't know, sat across from her, his posture relaxed but commanding, as if every inch of the room belonged to him, and yet he was perfectly content with her presence in it. He studied her silently for a moment, those intense eyes scanning her face, as though trying to decode some hidden truth about her. Ava fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, aware that her hands were clammy, but there was an inexplicable thrill in the way he looked at her, as if her presence had disrupted his perfectly ordered world in the most delightful way. Finally, he spoke, breaking the charged silence. "You're very composed, considering the unexpected entrance." His voice was smooth, rich, with a subtle edge of amusement that made her heart race. Most people would have run by now, or at least screamed. Ava blinked, trying to compose herself, and forced a nervous laugh. "Well, I tend to handle surprises, in my own way." She hoped her tone sounded confident, but inside she felt like a deer caught in headlights. He tilted his head, intrigued, and leaned slightly forward. "I like that," he said simply. "It's rare to meet someone who doesn't immediately panic in a situation like this." There was a pause, a silence filled with tension, and Ava felt as if every second stretched into eternity. She wanted to speak, to explain, to somehow justify her presence, but the words seemed to vanish before they could leave her mouth. Finally, she blurted, "I'm really sorry. I wasn't supposed to be here. I thought this was someone else's place." He raised an eyebrow, his lips curving into a small, amused smile. "I suspected as much," he said, "though I admit, the way you looked at me when I kissed you suggested you might have been expecting it." Ava's cheeks burned crimson. "I wasn't expecting, it was a complete mistake." She stammered, wishing she could vanish into the plush carpet beneath her feet. But he only chuckled, the sound low and hypnotic, sending shivers down her spine. "Mistakes can be enlightening," he said, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Sometimes, they show us things we never realized we wanted." Ava swallowed hard, trying to process what he meant, while her mind raced with thoughts about how she had ended up in this mansion, how easily one wrong turn could lead to such a life-altering moment, and how strangely magnetic this man's presence was. He stood then, moving with a grace that was almost predatory, yet controlled, and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a sprawling garden illuminated by the soft glow of evening lights. "Tell me," he said without turning, "how often do you find yourself wandering into situations completely unplanned?" Ava hesitated, unsure if she should answer honestly. "Not often," she admitted. "I like to know what I'm getting into, usually." His eyes finally met hers, a spark of curiosity, and something deeper, flickering in their depths. "Interesting," he murmured. "You seem cautious, and yet here you are, in my living room, talking to me, after a kiss that most would consider bold." Ava's pulse quickened at his words, a mixture of embarrassment and excitement coursing through her. I guess I'm adaptable," she replied, trying to sound calm, though her heart threatened to betray her. He smiled, a small, knowing smile that hinted he understood more than she realized. "Adaptable," he repeated thoughtfully. "I like that. It's a rare quality." For a moment, they simply regarded each other, the tension between them palpable. Ava could feel the heat radiating from him, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she wanted to stay, to see where this strange, thrilling encounter might lead. He gestured toward a luxurious sofa, inviting her to sit, and she hesitated only briefly before complying, sinking into its softness with a mixture of awe and nervous anticipation. He remained standing, though, and she couldn't help noticing the way his presence seemed to dominate the room without any effort at all. "So," he said finally, his voice low and intimate, "tell me something about yourself, Ava. Something no one else knows." The directness of the question caught her off guard. She wasn't used to strangers, especially strangers who could mistake her for someone else, being so personal, so probing. Yet there was an intensity in his gaze, a sincerity that made it impossible to lie. She thought for a moment, debating whether to share a small detail or to keep the deeper parts of herself hidden. I write," she said finally, testing the waters. "Short stories. Nothing big, nothing anyone reads." He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. And what do your stories say about you? He asked. They explore emotions, moments people overlook, the little things that matter, she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. I guess, I notice things most people don't. He nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression crossing his handsome features. I see, he said, stepping closer now, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. You notice details, but you also seem willing to step into chaos, to embrace the unexpected. Ava's breath caught at his words, unsure whether he was complimenting her or merely observing her with clinical precision. But something in the warmth of his gaze told her it was admiration, and a thrill ran through her body at the realization that he found her intriguing, even desirable. Perhaps, she said softly, almost a whisper. I guess I've learned that life is too short to always play it safe. He smiled then, a slow, deliberate smile that made her pulse spike and her stomach flutter. Exactly, he said, his voice almost a caress. And yet, some risks lead to the most remarkable outcomes. There was a charged pause, a suspended moment in time, and Ava realized she was utterly captivated by him, the billionaire, the stranger, the man who had kissed her in a hallway she never should have entered. She wanted to ask him questions, to know everything about him, but at the same time, she was afraid of what she might discover, afraid of how strongly she might be drawn into this world that seemed so far removed from her own. He leaned closer, just enough that she could feel the faint warmth of his breath, and his eyes locked on hers with a piercing intensity. You're not like anyone I've ever met, he said softly, and I can't stop thinking about you. Ava's heart raced, and she struggled to find her voice. I'm not even supposed to be here, she whispered, torn between the reality of her mistake and the undeniable pull between them. He chuckled softly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Maybe that's exactly why you're here, he said, and in that instant, Ava felt the world tilt, her entire being consumed by the magnetic, thrilling, dangerous allure of the man who had mistaken her for someone else, and yet, somehow, could not let her go. Ava sat back, trying to calm her racing thoughts, but it was impossible. The mansion, the billionaire, the kiss, they all swirled together in a dizzying storm she couldn't escape. She was supposed to be cautious, to apologize profusely, and leave immediately, yet she found herself unable to move, rooted to the sofa by a mix of fear, curiosity, and something far more dangerous, attraction. He watched her closely, his dark eyes like magnets, drawing her into a world she had never even imagined. You know, he said, finally breaking the silence, I rarely make mistakes, but this feels like the most fortunate mistake of my life. Ava blinked at him, unsure how to respond. Fortune, mistake, she barely knew him, and yet the way he said it sent shivers down her spine. I think you might be exaggerating, she muttered, brushing a hand over her hair nervously, though a small smile threatened to betray her own thrill. He shook his head slowly, a playful glint in his eyes. I never exaggerate when it comes to things that matter, he said. His words were deliberate, and Ava's stomach twisted with anticipation. She realized, almost painfully, that she wanted him to mean it. That she wanted to be the person who mattered, even in a moment as absurd as a mistaken mansion entry. He rose and walked over to a sleek bar on the side of the room, pouring 2 glasses of what looked like vintage wine. Drink, he offered, handing one to her. Ava hesitated. This was insane. She barely knew him, and yet something told her this encounter was unlike any other she had experienced. Finally, she accepted the glass, holding it carefully as though it were a fragile extension of herself. He raised his own glass to hers, and for a brief moment, their fingers brushed, sending an electric spark through her entire body. To unexpected encounters, he said, his voice low and smooth. And the surprises they bring. Ava chuckled softly, the tension easing just a bit. I suppose, if nothing else, this is unforgettable, she admitted. He smiled knowingly, clearly pleased by her admission, and settled back into his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her heart flutter uncontrollably. Tell me, he said, leaning forward, do you often find yourself in situations that are chaotic? Spontaneous, unplanned? Ava laughed nervously, swirling the wine in her glass. Not really, she admitted. I like structure, routines, predictable days. But sometimes life just throws you into chaos whether you like it or not. His eyes darkened slightly, a shadow of intrigue passing over his face. I like that, he said. There's something admirable about someone who can navigate unpredictability with grace. Ava felt her chest tighten. Grace. That wasn't how she would have described herself, yet hearing it from him felt like a thrill and a validation all at once. I guess I've learned that sometimes you have to roll with it, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, leaning back, his gaze never leaving her. Life is full of opportunities, he said thoughtfully, and often the most unexpected ones are the ones that define us. Ava caught herself staring at him, mesmerized by his presence. There was a commanding aura about him that was impossible to ignore, a blend of power, confidence, and an inexplicable warmth that made her feel both safe and dangerously excited at the same time. She took a small sip of her wine, trying to steady herself, but the subtle taste of it mingled with the thrill coursing through her veins, leaving her lightheaded. "You're intoxicating," she whispered almost unconsciously, her eyes widening as soon as the words left her mouth. He raised an eyebrow, amused and intrigued. "Is that so?" he asked, leaning slightly closer. "I could say the same about you," he murmured. Ava's heart raced, her mind scrambling for a logical response, but there was none. All reason had been swept away in the tide of this dangerous, magnetic attraction. She shifted slightly in her seat, feeling the tension between them coil tighter, a pulse of energy connecting them in a way neither of them could deny. "You're playing with fire," she said softly, almost a warning, yet there was a tremor of excitement in her voice. "Perhaps," he replied with a sly smile, "but sometimes fire is exactly what we need." For the next several minutes, they sat in a charged silence, the air thick with unspoken words, lingering touches, and stolen glances. Ava found herself studying every detail, the way his lips curved when he smiled, the faint calluses on his hands, the subtle intensity in his eyes. She realized with a start that she was dangerously close to falling under his spell, and that the thought both thrilled and terrified her. He, in turn, seemed equally fascinated, leaning back with a self-assured ease, yet every so often his gaze flicked toward her with a raw, unguarded intensity that hinted at something deeper, something he couldn't control, even if he tried. The room itself seemed to shrink around them, the outside world fading away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of heat, tension, and impossible chemistry. Ava swallowed hard, trying to keep her composure, but her mind was spinning. How had a simple mistake, entering the wrong mansion, led to this? To a stranger who had kissed her, studied her, and now captivated her completely. She felt a thrill she hadn't experienced in years, a dangerous excitement that whispered both promise and peril. He broke the silence finally, his voice low and intimate. "I don't usually let people in, not like this," he admitted, his eyes locking on hers. "But there's something about you, Ava. Something I can't ignore." Ava's breath caught. Her name, spoken by him in that tone, felt electric, intimate, and intoxicating all at once. I don't even know who you are," she whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. "And yet," he said softly, stepping closer, "I feel like I already know enough to want more." Her heart thundered in her chest. She wanted to flee, to run from the intensity, but every fiber of her being rooted her to the spot. She wanted to know more, to explore this unexpected connection that had ignited in a single, mistaken moment. "You're dangerous," she said, a soft warning disguised as a confession. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made her pulse spike. "Perhaps," he said, "but sometimes the most dangerous things are the most unforgettable." Ava shivered, aware that he wasn't just talking about danger in the ordinary sense, he was talking about the kind that stirred her heart, her mind, her body. She realized then that she was dangerously, irrevocably drawn to him, and the thought both excited and terrified her. The night stretched on, filled with whispered conversations, stolen glances, and the unspoken tension of two people teetering on the edge of desire, curiosity, and the promise of something neither of them had expected but both were powerless to resist. In the heart of the mansion, amidst its grandeur and secrecy, Ava and the billionaire, strangers a few hours ago, were discovering a connection neither had anticipated, a spark that threatened to ignite into a flame capable of changing both their lives forever. And in that moment, Ava realized with startling clarity, one wrong turn, one unexpected kiss, and her world had been utterly transformed. Ava couldn't shake the feeling that every corner of the mansion held a secret, and with every step she took, that sensation deepened. The billionaire, whose name she still didn't know, led her down a long hallway lined with priceless artwork, his presence close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. He moved with an effortless confidence, each step deliberate, almost predatory, yet there was a gentleness in the way he glanced back at her, ensuring she kept up. I should probably explain something, he said, his voice low, carrying the same magnetic intensity that had kept her spellbound since their first encounter. Ava turned to look at him, curiosity mingling with apprehension. About what? She asked, trying to steady her voice, though her heart was racing. This place, he said, gesturing vaguely to the walls around them, is more than just a home. There are things about it, and about me, that most people would never see. Ava's eyebrows rose in surprise, a thrill of excitement mingling with fear. You mean, secrets? She asked cautiously. He stopped walking and turned to face her fully, those dark eyes locking onto hers. Yes, he said simply. Secrets, some personal, some professional, some dangerous. Ava's pulse quickened. Dangerous. The word sent a shiver down her spine, a mix of fear and curiosity. She wasn't sure whether she should feel terrified or exhilarated, but something in the way he said it made her want to know more. He moved closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Most people wouldn't handle the truth, he continued. Most would run the moment they realized what this life entails. But there's something about you, something that makes me think you might not run. Ava swallowed hard, feeling exposed under his intense scrutiny. She wanted to retreat, to create some distance, yet a magnetic pull kept her rooted to the spot, drawn to him in ways she couldn't explain. I'm not sure what to say, she admitted softly. I'm just, me, ordinary. He shook his head slowly, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. You're not ordinary, he said. Not to me, not tonight. The words made her heart flutter, and she realized that even though she had walked into this mansion by accident, she was no longer certain who was mistaken, the situation or her own life. He led her into a grand library, walls lined with books from floor to ceiling, a spiral staircase in one corner leading to a loft filled with rare volumes. The room smelled faintly of leather and aged paper, a comforting yet intoxicating scent that added to the surreal quality of the evening. Ava ran her fingers lightly over the spines of the books, fascinated by the collection. You read? He asked, tilting his head, clearly noticing her interest. Sometimes, she replied softly, unsure how to express her amazement at the sheer scope of the library. I like stories, I like imagining other worlds. He nodded thoughtfully, moving to a chair near the fireplace. Good, he said. Stories reveal truth in ways reality sometimes cannot. He gestured for her to sit, and she obliged, feeling the weight of the evening pressing down on her in the most thrilling way. As she sat, she realized she was still holding her glass of wine, the liquid now slightly warm from neglect. He chuckled softly at the sight, a sound that made her pulse quicken. Relax, he said. You're safe here, for now. Ava's mind swirled. Safe. That word seemed almost ironic in the presence of a man whose aura radiated danger and allure in equal measure. And yet, there was something undeniably reassuring about him, as if despite the intensity, he genuinely wanted to protect her. She sipped her wine cautiously, feeling the warmth spread through her veins, and found herself staring at him more than the books around her. He was magnetic, intoxicating, and entirely out of her league, yet here he was, talking to her, sharing this space, as if fate itself had conspired to bring them together. I have to ask, she said finally, her voice low, why me? Out of everyone, why did this happen tonight? He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. I don't know, he admitted. Perhaps it's luck, perhaps fate, perhaps something else entirely. Ava's heart skipped a beat at his honesty. Something else entirely. She wanted to probe, to demand an explanation, yet she hesitated, sensing that the answer might be more complicated than she could handle. He moved closer, his presence dominating the room, yet he didn't sit, keeping the tension alive, letting her feel the full weight of his attention. I've spent a long time controlling everything in my life, he said, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. And tonight, everything went off script. You walked in, and nothing has been the same since. Ava felt a shiver run down her spine. There was an honesty in his words that she hadn't expected, and it drew her in even more. And you don't regret it? She asked, curiosity tinged with fear. He smiled faintly, a slow, deliberate smile that made her heart race. Regret, he echoed. No, I don't regret it, not even a little. For a moment, they sat in silence, the crackling fireplace the only sound in the grand room. Ava's mind raced with thoughts of who he was, what this world represented, and how one mistake had led her to a place she never imagined she'd be. She felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration, realizing that the line between safety and danger, desire and caution, was razor-thin tonight. Then, without warning, he leaned down, his lips brushing the side of her face in a feather-light kiss, sending a jolt of electricity through her entire body. Ava gasped softly, her hands gripping the armrests of the chair. "You're reckless," she whispered, half scolding, half breathless. He chuckled, a sound that resonated deep in her chest. "Perhaps," he admitted, "but sometimes, a little recklessness is exactly what life demands." She felt herself drawn closer, her heart pounding with anticipation, confusion, and a thrilling sense of surrender. In that moment, the mansion felt less like a home and more like a world of possibilities, each secret hallway, each opulent room, a metaphor for the uncharted territory between them. Ava realized that she had walked into the wrong mansion, mistaken for someone else, and kissed by a man she barely knew, but she couldn't deny it, her life had irrevocably changed. And as the night deepened, she understood that what started as a mistake might very well become the most profound adventure of her life, one that neither she nor the billionaire could have anticipated, yet both were powerless to resist. Ava had barely begun to catch her breath from the intensity of the previous hours when a sudden sound echoed through the mansion, a sharp knock at the massive front door. Both of them froze, and for a moment, the spell that had drawn them together seemed to fracture under the intrusion of reality. The billionaire's jaw tightened, his eyes flashing with a controlled intensity that made Ava's pulse race even faster. "That must be the staff," he said, though the edge in his voice suggested he was not entirely certain. He rose, brushing past her with that same commanding presence, and headed toward the door, leaving Ava alone in the plush chair, feeling both exhilarated and apprehensive. She tried to calm herself, taking another sip of wine, but her thoughts refused to settle. The situation was spiraling in ways she couldn't predict. A billionaire's mansion, a mistaken identity, a kiss that had ignited an inexplicable connection, and now an unexpected visitor threatening to remind her of the outside world she had left behind. He returned a few moments later, his expression unreadable but his movements tense. "It's someone you should meet," he said, his voice measured, but Ava sensed the underlying warning. Her heart skipped a beat as she followed him down another hallway toward a room she hadn't yet seen, her mind spinning with questions. Who could this visitor be? Staff, business associate, or someone who might disrupt the fragile tension that had begun to build between them? As they entered the room, she was struck by its contrast to the opulent grandeur she had seen so far. It was simpler, almost understated, yet still undeniably elegant, with a desk of dark wood, a few shelves lined with books, and a single chair facing the door. Waiting there was a woman, tall and poised, with sharp features and an aura that demanded attention. Her eyes immediately fixed on Ava, narrowing slightly, and for a brief second, Ava felt a pang of discomfort. The billionaire introduced them formally, though his tone carried an unmistakable tension. "Ava, this is Victoria, she handles matters of importance around here." Victoria's gaze flicked over Ava, assessing her as if trying to determine her place in this unfamiliar world. Ava's nerves spiked. She had no idea how to respond, how to navigate this sudden intrusion into the intimate bubble that had formed between her and the billionaire. Victoria's expression softened fractionally, but there was still an unmistakable sharpness in her eyes. "I've heard of you," she said smoothly, her tone polite but carrying an edge. Ava blinked, unsure how to take the statement. I'm just visiting," she stammered, feeling suddenly self-conscious. The billionaire interjected, his hand resting lightly on Ava's back, a subtle anchor that reassured her. "She's not just visiting," he said, his eyes darkening slightly as he addressed Victoria. "She's here by chance. And yet, I find her presence compelling." Ava felt heat rise to her cheeks, a mixture of embarrassment and thrill coursing through her. She had not anticipated that this night, this encounter, would place her in a situation where her very presence could provoke such intensity and scrutiny. Victoria's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer, as if weighing some unspoken truth, and then she nodded slightly, acknowledging her without giving away any hint of approval. "Very well," she said, her voice clipped but controlled. "I suppose we'll see how this unfolds." The billionaire guided Ava to a nearby chair, insisting she sit while he addressed some business matter with Victoria. Ava felt a sudden wave of unease. The air between them shifted subtly, charged with a tension that was both thrilling and intimidating. She realized that this was the first real obstacle she had encountered since entering the mansion, someone whose presence reminded her that this world was not entirely hers, someone who could challenge the fragile connection she and the billionaire were building. She watched him, captivated, as he navigated the conversation with a grace and authority that left her in awe. Yet even as he spoke, his eyes would occasionally flick toward her, a silent acknowledgement of their shared secret, the unspoken bond that had formed in the hours since she arrived. Ava felt a rush of emotions, admiration, desire, nervousness, all blending into a dizzying cocktail of sensations. She realized that she was not just a visitor in the mansion, she was an active participant in a dynamic that was at once thrilling, confusing, and entirely intoxicating. As the conversation concluded, Victoria excused herself with a polite nod, leaving the room with a sense of calculated detachment. Ava exhaled quietly, her body relaxing slightly, yet she could still feel the residual tension in the air. The billionaire turned to her, his expression softening as he took a step closer. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle, yet threaded with concern. Ava nodded, trying to steady her racing heart. I think so," she replied, her voice slightly shaky. He smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that made her pulse spike. "Good," he said, "because tonight is far from over." The words sent a shiver down her spine. She had no idea what he meant, yet there was an undeniable thrill in the uncertainty, a magnetic pull that made her lean in closer despite the danger, despite the unknown. For a moment, they simply stood there, the room heavy with anticipation, their shared silence more powerful than any words could have been. Ava realized that this night, the mistaken mansion, the kiss, the unexpected encounter with Victoria, had already changed her in ways she hadn't anticipated. She was no longer just an ordinary woman who had wandered into the wrong house, she was a participant in a story far bigger, far more complex, and infinitely more dangerous than she could have imagined. And as the billionaire reached for her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her, Ava understood that this was only the beginning. There would be obstacles, challenges, and tests of trust, but for now, she was ready to face whatever came next, ready to explore the connection that had sparked between them, and ready to surrender, just a little, to the magnetic pull of a man who had turned her world upside down with a single, unexpected kiss. In that moment, the mansion no longer felt intimidating, it felt like the epicenter of possibility, desire, and danger all wrapped into one, and Ava knew, with a thrill she could hardly contain, that her life would never be the same again. Ava couldn't stop thinking about the billionaire even as she wandered through the mansion's sprawling corridors, her mind replaying every word, every glance, every brush of his hand. The way he had looked at her, the intensity in his eyes, lingered like a persistent fire she couldn't extinguish. She had barely caught her breath from the tension with Victoria, and yet here she was, drawn deeper into a world she had no right to enter, yet didn't want to leave. The mansion felt alive around her, each room a testament to wealth, power, and taste beyond ordinary comprehension, but what fascinated her most wasn't the luxury, it was him. She could still feel the residual warmth of his presence, the way his hand had lingered near hers, as though unconsciously marking her as someone he claimed, even though their entire encounter had started by mistake. She paused in front of a large mirror in one of the hallways, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, and caught a glimpse of herself. There was a thrill in seeing her reflection there, nervous, yet strangely radiant, as if the mansion itself had transformed her, and the man who lived here had awakened something within her she didn't even know existed. The door to one of the rooms creaked open, and he stepped out, catching her off guard. His tailored suit clung perfectly to his frame, and the sharp cut of his jacket, paired with that dangerous gleam in his eyes, made her pulse race uncontrollably. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, voice low, teasing, yet threaded with something deeper. Ava smiled nervously, trying to mask her fluttering heartbeat. I wanted to look around," she admitted, hoping the excuse sounded natural. He took a step closer, the scent of his cologne enveloping her, making her dizzy. "I'm not sure you understand," he murmured, his gaze locking onto hers with magnetic intensity. "This isn't just a house. There are things here, people here, that could complicate your life." The thrill of danger made her stomach tighten, and she realized she was terrified, but also unable to pull away. "I think I can handle complications," she whispered, half to herself, half to him. He smirked faintly, clearly amused and intrigued by her audacity. Perhaps, he said, stepping even closer, but some complications aren't meant to be handled, they're meant to be felt, experienced, and survived. The words sent a shiver down her spine. She was caught in his orbit, unable to resist the gravitational pull of his presence. He leaned closer, just enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, and brushed a soft kiss against her temple, a gentle, teasing gesture that made her heart leap. "You're dangerous," she breathed, half scolding, half yearning. He chuckled softly, a sound that reverberated through her chest. "And you," he said, his lips hovering dangerously close to hers, "are irresistibly intriguing." Ava's pulse pounded in her ears as she realized just how entangled she had become in this man's world, a world of power, wealth, and secrets she could hardly comprehend. She wanted to pull back, to remind herself that this was all temporary, a fleeting encounter, but the magnetic force of their connection made retreat impossible. He stepped back slightly, just enough to let her breathe, and gestured toward a massive window overlooking the city skyline. "Come," he said, "look at the view." Ava followed, her footsteps hesitant but eager, drawn to him like a moth to a flame. Together, they stood at the window, the city lights shimmering below like a sea of stars, a breathtaking backdrop to a night that had become increasingly surreal. She could feel the tension coiling between them, unspoken and electric, the kind of tension that made every nerve in her body alive with awareness. "You have no idea what you've walked into," he murmured, voice low, almost intimate. She tilted her head, her heart racing. "Maybe I do," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper, "and maybe, I don't care." The admission hung in the air, daring and vulnerable, and he looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Bold," he said, the word heavy with meaning. Bold, and entirely captivating. Ava realized, in that moment, that she was no longer simply a visitor, she was a participant in a dangerous dance, one that neither of them fully controlled. He reached for her hand, his fingers curling around hers in a possessive yet gentle grip, and she felt a wave of heat rush through her body. "There are things you don't know about me," he continued, voice soft but firm, "and some truths might frighten you. Some might change everything." She looked into his eyes, searching for a hint of threat, but all she found was raw honesty, vulnerability. She hadn't expected in someone so commanding. I can handle it," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions coursing through her. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her words, and then smiled slowly, a dangerous, intoxicating smile that made her knees weak. "Perhaps," he said, "but can you handle the temptation?" The words lingered between them, charged with meaning, and Ava felt a tremor of excitement mixed with fear. She realized that the attraction between them had escalated beyond simple curiosity. It had become a potent, undeniable force, one that could consume them both if they weren't careful. He leaned closer, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, his lips so near she could feel the warmth radiating from them. "You're walking a fine line," he whispered, "between fascination and obsession. And I have no intention of letting you go." Ava's breath caught, and she felt her body respond in ways she hadn't anticipated. The room felt charged, every inch of space between them alive with unspoken promises, dangerous allure, and the thrill of forbidden desire. She wanted to step back, to resist, to remind herself that this world was not hers, but every instinct screamed to stay, to explore, to surrender just a little to the pull of this enigmatic, irresistible man. And in that moment, Ava understood with startling clarity that she was in over her head, yet utterly captivated, her heart and mind ensnared by the billionaire who had kissed her by mistake but now claimed her attention, her curiosity, and, whether she was ready or not, her desire. The city lights sparkled below them, a silent witness to the uncharted territory they were about to traverse, a night of secrets, temptation, and connection that would alter both their lives forever, leaving Ava acutely aware that she had crossed a threshold from which there might be no return. Ava thought she had begun to understand the rules of this dangerous, intoxicating game she had stumbled into, but the night had other plans, as if the mansion itself conspired to test her resolve. Just as she was beginning to feel comfortable with the billionaire's presence, his magnetic charm, the subtle warmth of his hand brushing hers, the undeniable tension between them, a sudden phone call from an unknown number shattered the fragile bubble they had created. The billionaire's expression shifted instantly from captivating calm to sharp alertness, and Ava noticed, for the first time, a hint of vulnerability in the way he answered the call. He whispered a few words into the phone, his tone low, urgent, almost commanding, and Ava's curiosity flared despite the warning in her gut. She couldn't hear the other side, but the look on his face told her that the conversation was serious, possibly dangerous. When he hung up, his jaw was tight, and his eyes held a storm she had never seen before. "I need to handle something," he said abruptly, brushing past her, but his hand lingered on her shoulder, grounding her despite the sudden tension. Ava felt a mixture of concern and fear, unsure whether to follow him or stay put, but before she could make a decision, he returned, his expression slightly softer, though still guarded. "That was unexpected," he said, a shadow of frustration in his voice. "And it complicates things." "Complicates," Ava echoed, her heart pounding. She felt a pang of anxiety, a sense that this night was about to take a turn she wasn't prepared for. He looked at her, and for the first time, she noticed the depth behind his intense gaze, not just desire, but responsibility, secrets, and a life far more complex than she could have imagined. "I have obligations," he admitted, his voice low, almost intimate. "Things I can't ignore, people who are counting on me, and decisions that can't wait." Ava felt a flutter of worry mixed with curiosity. She had entered this world by accident, but now she realized she was being pulled into its depths, far beyond anything she had imagined. "I don't understand," she whispered, a mix of fear and desire in her tone. He reached for her hand, and the simple touch sent a jolt of electricity through her body, reminding her of the intensity of their connection. "You don't need to understand everything right now," he said gently, yet firmly. "What matters is that you trust me, and that you know I want you here, despite the complications." Ava's chest tightened, her mind swirling with a blend of excitement and apprehension. She wanted to ask questions, to understand the complexities of his life, but every fiber of her being urged her to stay, to surrender to the magnetic pull she could not resist. He led her to a balcony overlooking the city, the lights glittering like 1,000 tiny stars below. The cool night air brushed against her skin, but the warmth between them was undeniable. "I should warn you," he said, his tone shifting slightly, serious now, "my world isn't like yours. There are rules, expectations, and sometimes danger." Ava swallowed hard, feeling a thrill mixed with fear. "I don't care," she said quietly, almost defiantly, "I want to be here, with you." His eyes darkened with a mixture of desire and admiration, and he stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Bold," he murmured, echoing her own daring words from earlier nights. "And reckless," she countered, feeling the rush of excitement at their playful yet intense banter. He smiled, a dangerous, captivating smile that made her pulse race, and then, without warning, pulled her into a kiss that was far more consuming than the first, a kiss that spoke of urgency, desire, and a connection neither of them could deny. Ava felt her body respond instinctively, a mix of fear, thrill, and longing intertwining in a dizzying combination. They broke apart briefly, gasping, foreheads resting together, each breath heavy with anticipation. "There's something about you," he whispered, his voice low, intimate, and charged with intensity. "Something I can't explain, something I can't resist." Ava's heartbeat pounded in her ears. "And you?" she asked softly, searching his eyes. "You're dangerous," he said, his lips brushing hers again, "but I can't, won't, stay away." The moment was interrupted, however, by a knock at the balcony door. Both of them turned, tension snapping back into the room. A man, sharply dressed and clearly not a servant, appeared, his presence formal and imposing. The billionaire's expression hardened, his protective instincts flaring as he stepped between Ava and the intruder. "What is it?" he demanded, his voice low but commanding. The man handed him a small envelope, his eyes betraying the seriousness of the message. Ava watched, intrigued and alarmed, as the billionaire quickly opened it. His face remained unreadable for a few moments, but when he finally looked at her, there was an edge of worry she had never seen. "This changes things," he said softly, slipping the envelope into his pocket. "You might need to leave soon, at least temporarily." Ava felt a pang of disappointment and fear. Leave? She had come here by mistake, yet now she was realizing she didn't want to leave at all. Not after everything that had happened tonight, not after the connection, the intensity, the attraction she couldn't ignore. I don't want to go," she admitted quietly, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the railing. He reached for her, holding her hand firmly, a silent reassurance. "I know," he said, voice low, intense, and comforting all at once. But your safety, our safety, has to come first. Ava's mind reeled. His world was dangerous, full of responsibilities and unseen threats, yet here he was, standing beside her, protective, magnetic, irresistible. The tension between them crackled, a mix of urgency, desire, and anticipation that neither could deny. And in that moment, Ava realized the truth. One wrong turn, one mistaken kiss, had pulled her into a world of wealth, danger, and passion, a world she was beginning to crave, a world she could no longer imagine leaving, no matter the risks that lay ahead. The night stretched on, filled with unspoken promises, dangerous allure, and the knowledge that the bond between them had deepened beyond mere chance. Ava knew that their connection was no longer accidental. It was intentional, magnetic, and transformative, and no matter what complications awaited, she was ready to face them, hand in hand with the billionaire who had turned her world upside down, and ignited a fire in her heart that refused to be extinguished. The night had stretched into the early hours, the mansion bathed in the soft glow of chandeliers and city lights, but Ava felt wide awake, her mind and heart racing with everything that had happened. The billionaire, whose name she had now learned was Alexander, stood near the grand fireplace, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak, as if the entire world had shrunk to the space between them. She had spent the evening navigating his world, learning about the responsibilities, the dangers, and the secret complexities that came with being near him. Yet despite all that, despite the warnings, the sudden phone calls, the mysterious visitors, and the whispered secrets of his mansion, she couldn't deny the magnetic pull that had drawn them together from the very first mistaken kiss. Alexander stepped closer, his tall frame commanding yet tender, and Ava could feel the warmth radiating from him, a heat that made her shiver with both fear and excitement. "Ava," he said softly, voice low and deliberate, "tonight has been chaotic, unexpected, and complicated. But through it all, one thing has become undeniable." She swallowed hard, her heartbeat echoing in her chest. "What is it?" she whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer, yet longing for it with every fiber of her being. He reached for her hand, his fingers curling around hers in a possessive, yet gentle grip, and she felt an electric jolt surge through her. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a raw honesty she had never expected. "From the moment you walked into my life, by mistake, yes, but perhaps by fate, I've been unable to ignore you, to ignore this connection between us." Ava's chest tightened, a mixture of relief, excitement, and nervous anticipation flooding her senses. "Alexander," she breathed, her voice trembling slightly, "I feel the same way." The words seemed to hang in the air, charged with meaning, and for a moment, the mansion, the city, the entire world faded away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of intimacy, desire, and unspoken promises. He stepped closer, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was no longer tentative or accidental, but deliberate, passionate, and consuming. Ava felt her body respond instinctively, a wave of warmth and longing coursing through her, as if every nerve in her being had been awakened in that single, exquisite moment. They pulled apart briefly, foreheads resting together, breathing in sync, hearts racing, and Ava realized that this was more than attraction, it was a bond that neither chance nor circumstance could undo. "I have to confess something else," Alexander murmured, his lips hovering near her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "My life, it's complicated. There are people, situations, responsibilities that I can't fully explain right now. But none of it matters as much as you, as this moment, as what I want with you." Ava's mind reeled, but she trusted him, the pull between them, the honesty in his gaze, the way he had protected and drawn her in, all made her believe that whatever challenges awaited, they could face them together. "Then we'll face it together," she said softly, her fingers tightening around his. "Whatever it is, wherever it takes us, I don't want to be anywhere else but here, with you." A small, genuine smile broke across his face, a rare moment of vulnerability and joy, and he pulled her into a long, lingering embrace, holding her as if letting go was impossible. The mansion around them felt alive with possibility, its grandeur and secrets no longer intimidating, but a backdrop to a love that had emerged in the most unexpected, thrilling, and beautiful way. They moved toward the balcony together, the city skyline stretching endlessly below, lights twinkling like stars. Alexander held her close, his voice low and intimate as he spoke of dreams, desires, and the future he suddenly imagined with her in it. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," he admitted, "but I know that I want you in it." By my side, through everything, for everything. Ava's heart soared, the weight of fear and uncertainty melting into the pure exhilaration of connection, trust, and love. Then I'm here, she whispered, pressing herself closer, feeling the heat of his body and the undeniable reality of their bond. The night deepened, the world outside silent and distant, as they shared stories, laughter, and quiet confessions, building a foundation stronger than any mansion walls could contain. Alexander revealed small glimpses of his life, his struggles, the pressures of wealth and expectation, and the rare moments when he allowed himself vulnerability, and Ava responded with empathy, curiosity, and the courage to love someone whose life was far more complicated than her own. They discovered a rhythm, an unspoken understanding, a partnership forming not out of convenience or circumstance, but out of undeniable attraction, mutual respect, and the spark that had begun with a single mistaken kiss. Hours passed like minutes, and when they finally pulled back to look at each other, the intensity in their eyes spoke volumes. Words were no longer necessary. The connection, the trust, the passion, and the promise of a future together were all reflected in that gaze. Alexander brushed a stray lock of hair from Ava's face, his hands lingering with gentle care. "You've changed me," he admitted quietly, his voice filled with wonder. "In ways I didn't expect, ways I can't ignore. And I don't want to go back to before you were here." Ava smiled softly, her heart swelling with emotion. "You've changed me too," she whispered. "You've made me brave, curious, and willing to take a risk I never thought I would." He leaned down, capturing her lips again in a kiss that was both tender and consuming, sealing the unspoken promises that had formed between them. In that instant, the mansion, the mistakes, the dangers, and the secrets of his world all seemed insignificant compared to the undeniable truth. They had found each other, and nothing could undo what had begun. As dawn approached, casting a soft golden glow across the mansion's grand rooms, Ava and Alexander stood together, hands intertwined, hearts aligned, and eyes reflecting the thrill of a love discovered unexpectedly, passionately, and irrevocably. One wrong turn, one mistaken kiss, had led to a lifetime of possibilities, and as they looked out over the city that stretched endlessly before them, they knew that this was only the beginning of a story neither could have anticipated but both were destined to embrace, together, forever.